At 2:19 a.m., the crew of the USNS oceanographic survey vessel, conducting authorized survey operations in international waters 340 kilometers southeast of Hainan Island, reported via encrypted communications that 6 planned Type-022 Houbei-class missile boats were approaching on an intercept vector at 42 knots. The watch officer on the survey vessel had been awake since midnight. The approach was not a surprise. Type-022s had been conducting harassment maneuvers against U.S. survey vessels in the South China Sea for 11 months, and this pattern had been cataloged in 4 separate Indo-PACOM intelligence assessments. The standard procedure was to transmit position, maintain course, and avoid provocative movement. The watch officer had read all 4 assessments during his pre-deployment briefing. He initiated the reporting sequence at 2:19 a.m. and transmitted his position to the carrier group operating 380 kilometers to the southeast. At 2:22 a.m., the 6 Type-022s reached a range of approximately 800 meters from the survey vessel and opened fire. The watch officer's last transmission before the vessel's communications equipment was damaged was 17 words. Contact at 800 meters, weapons fired, crew abandoning ship, all personnel accounted for, request immediate assistance. That transmission reached the carrier's watch floor at 2:22 a.m. It reached NSA's Pacific Collection Facility simultaneously, triggering an automated cross-reference against the planned Southern Theater Command's encrypted communications traffic that the collection architecture had been monitoring continuously. The cross-reference resolved at 2:23 a.m. 61 seconds before the Type-022s had fired their first rounds, a coded activation order had transmitted from the planned Southern Theater Command's Operations Center to the Type-022 Squadron's command vessel. The order was in an authentication format that the collection architecture had cataloged as specific to offensive engagement authorization. It was not an exercise format. It was not a standing patrol order. It was an engagement activation, transmitted 61 seconds before the survey vessel's crew began abandoning ship. The attack on the USNS survey vessel was not a miscalculation, not an overzealous patrol commander's independent decision, and not an accident. It was authorized from a regional command headquarters 61 seconds before it happened. That 61-second gap between the activation order and the first rounds fired was not tactically significant. It was legally and strategically decisive. It transformed the incident from an ambiguous maritime confrontation into a documented deliberate act, traceable, authenticated, and attributable to a specific command authority in a specific location. The plan's strategic calculation had been developing within the Central Military Commission's strategic planning staff for 8 months and had been assessed by the intelligence community as a viable plan option for 14 of those months. The calculation was about deterrence credibility, not about a survey vessel. The carrier group, operating 380 kilometers to the southeast of the incident, represented the central element of U.S. power projection in the South China Sea. Its effectiveness as a deterrent depended on its willingness to operate within the range of the DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, a system with approximately 1,500-kilometer range. When doing so was operationally required. The plan's analysis had identified what their planning documents described as deterrent standoff behavior. The historical tendency of U.S. carrier groups to remain beyond DF-21D engagement range, except under direct operational necessity, effectively allowing the DF-21D's existence to impose a geographic constraint on carrier operations without the plan ever firing one. The attack on the survey vessel was designed to test this constraint at its cheapest possible price point. A USNS oceanographic survey vessel is a non-military survey platform. Its loss was operationally inconsequential to the carrier group's capability, but it was a U.S.-flagged vessel in international waters. The question the plan was posing with the attack was specific. Would the carrier group close to within DF-21D range to respond to a survey vessel attack, or would it accept the precedent that planned vessels could act against U.S. ships south of a geographic line defined by the DF-21D's reach? If the carrier stayed beyond range, the plan had demonstrated that the DF-21D could constrain U.S. response without being fired. If the carrier closed to within range and was targeted, the plan had demonstrated the DF-21D's operational employment. If the carrier closed and the DF-21D missed or was intercepted, the plan had lost 4 expensive missiles and the carrier had answered the question. The Central Military Commission had assessed all 3 outcomes as acceptable for their strategic purposes. The plan's preferred outcome was the first one, the carrier staying beyond range, and their confidence in that outcome was assessed at 68% based on historical carrier positioning data over the preceding 30 months. Their confidence interval was about to close. The authorization for a proportional response transmitted to Indopacom at 2:31 a.m., 9 minutes after the survey vessel was fired upon. The 9-minute timeline was not accidental. The NSA cross-reference confirming deliberate command authorization had been the prerequisite for a specific response authority that had been pre-negotiated in the Rules of Engagement framework. An attack on a U.S. government vessel confirmed as deliberately authorized by an adversary command authority triggered a proportional kinetic response against the authorizing force without requiring additional Washington consultation. The 9 minutes were the time required to transmit the NSA cross-reference confirmation through the authorization chain. The proportional response was explicitly designed to mirror the plan's action in scope and target set. The forces that had conducted the attack addressed with the same category of effect they had imposed on the survey vessel, not the planned Southern Theater Command facility that had issued the activation order. That was a mainland China target and escalation beyond proportionality. Not planned shore infrastructure on Hainan. Not the Type-052 destroyers 80 kilometers north of the Type-022 position. Those had not participated. The 6 Type-022 Houbei-class boats and the 2 Type-054A frigates that had escorted them to the firing position. Those 8 vessels. That response. The CAOC targeting officer who assembled the proportional response package had spent 11 years in naval surface warfare before transitioning to targeting. He had spent 4 years on the Pratas Island assessment, 3 on the South China Sea engagement framework, and 11 months specifically on the survey vessel harassment pattern that had elevated to intelligence priority after the 7th documented incident. He had been awake since the harassment intercept at 2:19 a.m. When the proportional response authorization transmitted at 2:31 a.m., the package was on his screen, waiting. He had built it 14 weeks earlier when the harassment pattern assessment had elevated to pre-attack posturing classification. He forwarded it for engagement control review at 2:31 a.m. and received back approval at 2:33 a.m. 2 minutes of review for 14 weeks of preparation. At 2:35 a.m., 8 F-35Cs launched from the carrier. The aircraft's targeting packages included the planned Type-022 positions, which were still in a loose formation 340 kilometers northeast of the carrier's current position, They had not withdrawn after the attack, remaining in a holding pattern near the survey vessel's last position. The carrier was now closing. At its current speed, it would be within 280 kilometers of the Type-022 position in 42 minutes. That was within DF-21D range. The carrier knew this. The carrier closed anyway. The decision to close was the answer to the plan's strategic question. It was made, documented, and logged at 2:34 a.m. when the carrier's commanding officer ordered the course change toward the engagement zone. It was made without reference to the DF-21D's existence as a deterrent. The DF-21D was a factor in the engagement assessment, not a factor in the decision to engage. These were not the same consideration. At 2:44 a.m., the EA-18G Growlers, 2 aircraft, launched at 2:37 a.m., reached their jamming altitude over the South China Sea and activated against the PLAN Type-022 2 squadrons target and radar and the Type-054A frigates fire control frequencies. The jamming did not prevent the plan from knowing the U.S. aircraft were present. It prevented the plan from generating confidence-level targeting solutions against moving vessels while the jamming was active. Without a targeting solution, their YJ-12 anti-ship missiles could not be released with acceptable probability of acquisition. The plan Type-022 position had been under continuous P-8A surveillance since 2:23 a.m. All 6 Type-022 vessels and both Type-054A frigates had precise position fixes, course, and speed continuously updated. The LRASM targeting solution was complete before the first aircraft left the catapult. At 2:49 a.m., 12 LRASM launched from the F-35 Sea Wave at extended range against the Type-022 positions. Simultaneously, 8 Harpoon Block II missiles launched from the 2 U.S. surface combatants that had been closing toward the engagement zone since 2:31 a.m. The combined wave, 20 systems against 8 vessels, disproportionate in ratio, proportional in intent. The plan had fired on a U.S. government vessel. The vessels that had fired were being addressed. The plan's Type-02 two-point defense consisted of HHQ-10 close-in missiles and standard electronic countermeasures. Against LRASM's autonomous terminal approach, varying its angle in the final approach to defeat predictive fire control, the HHQ-10 engagement rate was assessed at approximately 30% intercept probability per inbound missile at current inventory load. Against 12 LRASM plus 8 Harpoon, the combined intercept capacity of the 8 planned vessels was insufficient to handle the wave volume. 7 of 12 LRASM produced confirmed impacts. 3 were intercepted by HHQ-10 systems. 2 missed when their terminal seekers encountered GPS-denied environments near the northern vessels in the formation, where a planned jamming system was active. The 2 missed missiles were logged and redirected from the follow-on reserve wave. 5 of 8 Harpoon Block II produced confirmed impacts. 2 were intercepted by HHQ-16 from the Type-054A frigates. 1 missed when the assigned target executed a high-speed evasive turn outside the terminal acquisition envelope. Running total at 2:53 a.m., $440 million in combined LRASM, Harpoon, and sortie costs. Against this, the 8 planned vessels in the engagement zone had a combined construction value of approximately $1.1 billion. 6 Type-022 Houbei-class at approximately $30 million each. 2 Type-054A frigates at approximately $360 million each. the survey vessel lost to the plan's opening action, approximately $180 million replacement value, plus the 40-person crew now in life, rafts 340 kilometers northeast of the carrier group. The exchange ratio was not the point of this accounting. The point was that the cost of attacking a U.S. government vessel had been priced in real time at the hull level. By 2:57 a.m., 5 of 6 Type-022s were confirmed non-functional, 3 with confirmed impact effects, 2 additional confirmed through follow-on LRASM reserve engagement. The 6th Type-022 had separated from the formation at 2:47 a.m. and was running northeast at maximum speed. It was 80 kilometers from the nearest plan installation on Hainan. The CAOC targeting officer had its position. The proportional response parameter had specified the 6 Type-022s. He had 5. The 6th was running. He flagged the status for command decision. The command decision was 5 of 6 within the proportional scope of the response. The 6th vessel's flight was its own statement. Both Type 054A frigates had been impacted. One had lost propulsion. The second had lost fire control systems. Both remained afloat. At 3:01 a.m., the plan activated 4 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles from a site in Guangdong Province. The carrier was now 310 kilometers from the Type-022 engagement zone within DF-21D terminal guidance range. The DF-21D's engagement of a carrier at 310 kilometers was within the system's operational parameters. The plan's confidence interval on the carrier remaining beyond 1,500 kilometers had closed entirely. The carrier had answered the strategic question by closing to 310 kilometers. The plan had answered the strategic question by firing. Messbers registered the launches at 3:01 a.m. Trajectory analysis. 4 tracks, anti-ship ballistic profile, conversion on the carrier group. Time to terminal phase, approximately 8 minutes. SM-3, Block 2A from the carrier's 2 escort destroyers engaged all 4 tracks in mid-course phase. 3 intercepts confirmed. 1 DF-21D descended through the SM-3 engagement window and entered terminal phase. Its active radar seeker acquired the carrier's radar signature at 28,000 feet. SM-6 engaged at 34,000 feet. The intercept vehicle's proximity fuse activated at 14 meters. The DF-21D's guidance failed in terminal approach. The re-entry vehicle impacted open ocean 1.1 kilometers from the carrier's port side. The carrier registered no structural effect. 4 DF-21Ds, 4 addressed. 0 hull impacts on any U.S. vessel. The P-8A crew that had been maintaining continuous surveillance of the Type-022 position since 2:23 a.m. tracked the surviving Type-022 until it entered the Hainan coastal territorial zone at 3:06 a.m., where its track was logged and handed off to the continuing surveillance architecture. The crew had been airborne for 6 hours before the incident and had been on station for the 44 minutes since the first distress signal. The imagery they had accumulated, the Type-022 positions, the survey vessel approach, the fire, the crew abandoning ship, was already in the forensic documentation package being assembled by the legal and intelligence staff. The surveillance had started as standard patrol. It had become the primary evidentiary record of a deliberate act. By 3:09 a.m., no additional planned offensive activity was registering on any sensor. The J-10C cap from Hainan had climbed to intercept parameters at 2:51 a.m. but had not closed within AIM-120D parameters before the F-35C wave completed its engagement. With the Growler jam inactive and the F-35C's passive sensor posture, the J-10C formation had been unable to generate lock-on against the U.S. aircraft. At 3:07 a.m., they had turned back toward Hainan. No AIM-120D had been expended. The 40 personnel from the USNS survey vessel's crew had been in life rafts since 2:23 a.m. An MH-60S from the carrier, launched at 2:33 a.m., reached their position at 3:04 a.m. and began recovery operations. All 40 personnel were aboard the helicopter by 3:19 a.m. 3 had sustained minor injuries from the initial attack. All were assessed as stable. In the CAOC, the targeting officer who had built the proportional response package closed the engagement record at 3:11 a.m. The record's final field, a mandatory entry in the response architecture he had helped develop, was a proportionality assessment. Did the U.S. response correspond to the scope, nature, and authorization level of the plan's initial action? The plan had authorized a deliberate attack on a U.S. government vessel from a regional command headquarters. The U.S. had addressed the forces that conducted the attack, using munitions at a combined cost comparable to the vessel's replacement value, targeting only the vessels confirmed as participating. He entered the assessment as proportional and forwarded the preliminary report. The preliminary report reached Washington and Indopacom simultaneously at 3:13 a.m. The plan had fired on a U.S. government vessel, confirmed as deliberately authorized, and had fired 4 DF-21Ds at a carrier group that had chosen to close rather than remain beyond engagement range. All 4 DF-21Ds had been addressed. The carrier was undamaged. The survey vessel crew was recovered. The Type-022s that had fired on the survey vessel were non-functional. Time from first attack on USNS survey vessel to cessation of active counter operations, 47 minutes. Plan actions: 6. Type-022 Houbei-class missile boats opened fire on USNS survey vessel at 2:22 a.m. 4 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles launched at 3:01 a.m. against U.S. carrier group. Survey vessel status. Total loss. Vessel sank at approximately 2:41 a.m. 40 personnel recovered by 3:19 a.m. 3 with minor injuries. DF-21. De-engagement. 3 of 4 intercepted by SM. 3 Block 2A in mid-course phase. 1 engaged by SM-6 in terminal phase. Guidance failed. Impacted ocean 1.1 kilometers from carrier. Carrier undamaged. Plan surface force results: 5 of 6 Type-022s non-functional, 4 from LRASM, 1 from Harpoon engagement. 1 Type-022 withdrew to Hainan territorial waters. Both Type-054A frigates mission degraded. All 8 planned vessels in the engagement zone addressed or withdrawn. U.S. assets lost. USNS survey vessel, total loss, $180 million replacement value. Personnel losses, 3 minor injuries among survey crew, all returned to duty. 0 combat personnel losses. Counter-operation munitions expended, 12 LRASM, 8 Harpoon Block 2, 4 SM, 3 Block 2A, 1 SM-6, 6 AARGMER. Total U.S. munitions expenditure. Estimated $310 million plus $180 million vessel loss. combined $490 million. Planned surface vessels and DF-21D assets addressed estimated $1.6 billion in combined replacement value. Exchange ratio 1 to 3.3 in U.S. favor. The strategic assessment was not reducible to an exchange ratio. The plan's test had posed a specific question. Would the carrier close to within DF-21D range in response to a survey vessel attack? The carrier had closed to 310 kilometers. The plan had fired 4 DF-21Ds. All 4 had been addressed. The carrier was undamaged. The DF-21D had been fired. It had been intercepted. The carrier had operated within its range and had not been hit. The plan's 68% confidence estimate that the carrier would remain beyond range had been disproven. The system they had invested 15 years and an estimated $8 billion developing as the asymmetric answer to U.S. carrier power had been activated in combat for the first time. It had been activated against a carrier that had chosen to close rather than stand off. 4 missiles. 0 hull effects. The data set for both sides was now a matter of operational record rather than theoretical modeling. The DF-21D had been tested against an actual carrier group conducting actual operations within its engagement range. The result was in the assessment database. The carrier remained on station. The survey vessel's crew was aboard the carrier by 3:41 a.m. The MH-60S had completed its recovery operations. The targeting officer had closed the engagement record. The proportionality assessment had been forwarded. The plan's strategic test had produced an answer. Whether it was the answer they had modeled was a question their analysis staff would work through in the hours following the engagement. The operational record was unambiguous. The carrier had closed. The DF-21D had been used. The carrier was undamaged. The vessels that had fired on the survey vessel were non-functional. The precedent that the 47-minute engagement had established was not symbolic. It was data. And both sides now had it. The plan's analysis staff would have the operational record within hours. The U.S. assessment staff had it now. The same data. The same result. The same 1.1 kilometers of open ocean between the DF-21D's re-entry vehicle and the carrier's hull. The distance that separated a precedent from a catastrophe was documented, classified, and already being studied by the people who would plan the next iteration of the same question.